Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Kirk Kern, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Thundercat Technology. My great pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Accelerating Digital Transformation Strategies with Artificial Intelligence, brought to you by Thundercat Technology and NetApp. During this webcast, we'll explore how defense and civilian agencies can use artificial intelligence technologies and techniques to efficiently tackle business objectives and execute mission-critical operations, especially in our current climate of increased telework. But before we get started with today's programs, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items. To the right of your screen, you'll find several icons, including a Q&A tab, which allows you to ask a question. We'll be fielding those questions towards the end of the program, but feel free to submit them along the way so we can get right to them. If you experience any technical difficulties, there is a red button at the bottom of the screen that says Test Your Connection. That button will take you to a help page. From there, you can browse a number of technical solutions, or you can chat directly with a member of the support team. Due to an influx of digital streaming and limited bandwidth, if you do lose connection at any point during the program, we encourage you to simply refresh your browser, and hopefully that will address your issues. This webcast is being recorded, and closed captioning will be provided for the in the on-demand program afterwards. So I'd like to introduce you to our esteemed co-panelists joining me today. First, Dr. Josh Dickey, Chief of the Analytics Branch in the Air Force Technical Applications Center. Josh, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kurt. I'm excited to be a part of this auspicious panel. So I've been with APTEC since 2007. APTEC is the Air Force Technical Applications Center. And for those that don't know, we operate the U.S. Atomic Energy Detection Systems, which comprise the largest distributed sensor network in the Air Force. And our mission is to detect and report on foreign nuclear explosions. So I spent my first 10 years at APTEC actually kind of working myself out of a job, hardening and upgrading the USAID system. And since then, I've been spearheading our efforts towards AI/ML. And coincidentally, much of my research was accomplished as part of a PhD program in AI, and I actually was just this past month finally awarded the degree. So I have a lot of recent hands-on experience with AI at a couple different levels, and I'm really excited to be part of the panel.
Well, congratulations on that, Josh. And our other panelist is Kirk Kern, from the Chief Technology Officer from NetApp Americas.
Hey, thank you, Kurt. Well, so as Kurt has said, I am CTO for Americas at NetApp. I am also the director of the Office in Technology and Strategy. In that group, I lead a group of scientists and engineers that help our customers build and consume their own suite of data services powered by what we call the NetApp Data Fabric. Part of those services and capabilities actually have a direct translation and applicability to artificial intelligence and help our customers build, consume, and quickly move to production of AI inferencing technologies and capabilities.
Great, Josh and Kirk, thanks for being part of today's discussion. I guess we'll start off, pretty straightforward and say, in the last few years, starting with U.S. Digital Services and moving through the ideas of the Modernizing Government Technology Act through plenty of initiatives on the commercial side as well, digital transformation has become a frequently used buzzword. So first, sort of big, quick picture question, where does your agency stand in the digital transformation journey? Or how do you help agencies realize that change of focus from manual to digital? Josh, how about you first?
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question. As a bit of background, APTEC, we've been doing nuclear treaty monitoring with this global geophysical sensor network, collecting streaming waveform data from air, land, and sea. We've been doing that since the late 1950s. And so part of our mission is to process that data in near real time to detect and identify nuclear testing. So as you can imagine, this has been a big data mission for a while, and we've come a long way since our inception in the 50s, when we were looking at the old helicorder, needle and paper seismic plots. So at this point, we've got really more than 3 decades of experience operationalizing machine learning models and expert systems to perform pattern recognition on streaming sensor data. And, in terms of where we're going, we have 3 big pushes right now, like pretty much everyone, as you would expect: unifying our data fabric, incorporating AI, and implementing cloud. Back to you.
Sure. Kirk, where are you seeing this? Obviously, you have Josh is dealing with AFTAC as a specific agency, but Kirk is CTO for the Americas. I'm sure you're dealing with a lot of different folks in terms of, federally focused folks as well as commercial. And where are you seeing that, where's NetApp helping those agencies kind of move from that manual towards the digital side?
Yeah, sure. So, I think what you see across the enterprise and in the public sector, and by enterprise, I'll loosely define, the top E1000 accounts in the Americas. We find that all of those organizations are really being stressed to compete against themselves and differentiate themselves in the marketplace. And so it causes an extreme impetus to move quickly to adopt new technologies, to make their businesses more agile, to deliver better services for their customers, and then fundamentally to improve upon the products that they're building for their customers. And so we see it in all aspects, from manufacturing through security, through customer support, and then eventually in service delivery via clouds, right? And so it's an all-encompassing, all-inclusive set of technologies that are coming together that are literally driving digital transformation for customers as well as the businesses that we service and support.
Sure. I think that's really the promise of what folks really kind of encompass around this digital transformation story, is like taking all these different things that you may have done in the past, whether it's, sensors on, pen and paper or whatever, and then kind of encouraging innovation and looking at new ways of doing things and being open to change and thinking about how companies like, take Uber or Amazon, even universities, and how they have to change their business or even invent new ones to meet the changing needs of what's out there. And I think, I think that's really important.
Yeah, and in fact, it's even in the industrial sector where you would not think is an area that's ripe for digital transformation, right? There's a company that we work with that builds compressors, right? Compressed air for large manufacturing. Traditionally sell the compressor, customer signs a maintenance contract to keep the compressors up and running, because if they don't have compressed air, they don't build the products that they want to deliver to the market. This compressor company has fundamentally instrumented all of their compressors now with a whole suite of sensors, and they no longer sell compressors, right? They sell compressed air as a service, right? And so they deliver the equipment necessary to power the manufacturing facility, and they use IoT sensors and strain gauges and vibration sensors to monitor and manage that service so that they give, that manufacturing plant a better capability, which is always on, always available compressed air at a much lower cost, because they no longer have to create the capital investment for this large compressed air system and the delivery mechanisms. And secondarily, the company building the compressors can deliver a better service to their manufacturing customer. It's amazing. It's literally happening everywhere.
Yeah, it's great, and it's encouraging folks to say, hey, not this is the way we've always done things, but how can we make things better? So, kind of, pivoting a little bit from that. Obviously, people have had to change quite a bit in the last few months, with the impact of COVID-19. How has your agency's digital transformation been impacted by COVID-19 at all, if at all, Josh?
Yeah, so the pandemic has been disruptive for the world, and at AFTAC we are not immune to that. In particular, prior to COVID, let's just say we were not in a telework mindset. And then when COVID hit, suddenly telework becomes the norm. And so fortunately, our leadership's been extremely proactive in providing the tools for telework. And there's been some hiccups, but in particular, we've opened some doors that we really don't want to close in terms of more fluid collaboration with outside partners, more rapid integration of open source software, and particularly in terms of what we're talking about today, rapid integration of AI/ML. As an example, right when COVID hit, we had a team in the building that was just getting spun up on a big AI/ML project. And prior to COVID, they were stuck in an extended holding pattern, waiting for software approvals and computing resources. But when COVID hit, they went off campus, they downloaded the open source software, they fired up their PCs, they started training models, and it saved several months off their anticipated schedule. And it really reinforced to us the need to permanently incorporate options for alternative work environments at AFTAC. And that's not to say that the existing approval processes are unnecessary or that they're broken. It's just to say that for certain types of work, these alternative, less restricted environments can be valuable, especially for low TRL, early research.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Kirk, how about you?
Well,
with the exception of this, and so I'd love to be in the room with you guys instead of on the phone back and forth. But sure, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen dramatic impact everywhere. We actually look at this problem as an IT challenge as well, and so the first sort of concept behind that is the work from home environment, and people directly jump to virtual desktop or VDI, right? And that's certainly a big component of it. But we look much more comprehensively at the problem, and we actually look at it as we encompass it around a series of solutions and strategies called end user computing. So not only should that end user have an ability to access his desktop virtually through whatever device he chooses to use at home, but that all of the applications that he uses or consumes, he or she uses or consumes, are available from that, either that remote location or through that virtual desktop. And so that does require some changes in the infrastructure in the enterprise. But when you make those changes, the impacts can be dramatic. Since you asked me about some of the other customers outside of public sector, we've got yet another customer that is in the pharmaceutical industry. Roughly, after they had to do a really quick, upgrade to all of their infrastructure so they could support all this work from home environment. They sent 47,000 workers from, office locations out to home. After about 2 weeks of just massive upgrades and updates, they're now seeing a savings of roughly $27 million a month in infrastructure costs by not having people there, and it's netting out that by the end of the year, throughout the course of the whole year, that'll save them roughly $217 million. The net effect is that you can now conduct your business with lower cost of operations, improves your earnings per share. They're not bringing those 47,000 employees back. They're going to continue to let them work from home because the business is continuing to operate. Everything's getting accomplished that they expected, and they fundamentally have a secure enterprise and infrastructure. So, that's just one example of how that's transformational for an enterprise group. I think the government is being impacted similarly, and I think you'll see some dramatic changes as to how they work with subcontractors, how they accrue hours, because in many cases you have to be on site in order to have contractual satisfaction. So it's going to be a real interesting time as we start to lift these these restrictions, because I think we'll find that the new norm is way more work from home and remote workforce.
Sure. I mean, I know just for in my own world here, obviously doing some of these things, we had scheduled an in-person, CI/CD pipeline workshop with partners, CloudBees, Sonatype, and some of the folks down in San Antonio within the Air Force, as well as some of the FSIs. We had to switch last minute and make it a WebEx thing. Worked no issue. And we published a paper as well for the new normal around educating folks on the ideals around what needs to happen and being proactive around remote access and kind of broaden your scope when you're looking at solutions, updating operational practices, and all this stuff was something that was out there. So based on that kind of we've looked a little bit about how it's been impacted. Are there any specific pain points that both of you are seeing? What steps have you taken in the organization to address them? And I think I'll just drop this back over to you, Kirk, since you started down a path right there, and I think I want to let you finish that a little bit further, maybe.
Well, clearly, employee morale, collaboration is challenging, right? And so you have to think of new ways to improve the collaboration, improve the effectiveness of the virtual desktop sessions, or when you're on these these Zoom calls or WebEx calls, they have to be way more scripted and orchestrated, and give the people on those forums an ability to interact and exchange. Because what you'll find is sometimes someone will tend to dominate those calls, so it's hard to interrupt. And so you've got to get better at conducting virtual meetings, and then secondarily, you have to do things differently to keep that collaborative spirit up. And so sometimes I find that self-organizing projects are sometimes good, where you say, hey, what if I propose this problem? What would you do to satisfy it or solve the problem, right? And I'm not going to tell you who's in charge, and I'm not going to say, how you get to the end point, but, give me a readout in 2 weeks and come back. And so they kind of go off and do their own things, and they have to figure out ways to, self-organize and develop a solution to the problem. And so those kind of things I think are really interesting.
Sure. Josh, obviously, you're dealing with this kind of on a day-to-day basis where AFTAC is, at least where some of the main offices of AFTAC are down in Florida. How are you guys dealing with it down there?
Yeah, and kind of to what Kurt was bringing up, there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of, negative emotions that are tied up with what's going on right now. And there's really nothing avoidable that, you can do to address that. But in terms of the work environment and the digital transformation, we've been able to get over a lot of the hurdles that we had with access and security. And to be honest, on a sort of a positive note, our leadership got us the tools to effectively do telework. And at this point, I can say that over the last month, I've probably had less IT issues with our remote desktop than I normally do at the office. So there are some positives that are coming out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of interesting in that folks have had to forced to look at different policies, different security policies, and making sure that folks have the things that they need, and kind of goes back to the initial thing. It's like, hey, we've kind of always done things one way, but now with this new change, maybe we have to do things a little differently, and maybe some new things come out. There's actually one question from a user that I want to throw out there, just because it kind of fits in this sort of kind of a pain point, or you can also look at it in terms of that understanding the concept of what is trusted and through security policy reviews. And the question is, what about issues related to extending classified infrastructure to a home environment? I don't want to get too deep into it, but do you guys see anything in terms of maybe certain things need to go a different way, maybe we need to change things around? And obviously both and myself as well have dealt with environments like this, so I'm just curious if there was anything that might make sense for that particular question, because I think it makes sense in this context.
Well, this is Kirk. I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead, Josh.
Sorry.
I'll let you do it.
No, go ahead, go.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I can turn anything into a data challenge or a data problem, right? And in the scenario that you just described, one of the ways that you need to protect your data is to have some centralized control of it and understand, where that information lies when it moves out to the endpoints. And so there are some technological approaches and techniques that you can use to control and manage your data. And so while I think the network security aspects are fairly well understood and can be controlled, and user identity access and management are good. Understanding flows of data, where data moves across an organization and now across these VPN boundaries or zero trust networking domains, things get a little more complicated. So I think the challenge and the solution once again goes back to data management.
Sure, Josh, how about you?
Yeah, we've sort of maintained our existing order of business. We've just been able to prioritize access to the building and the classified networks for the people that need them. So it's there's different approaches you can take.
Yep. No, that makes sense. And obviously, there's things that can be and must be secured in your world as well. Thinking about back to the organizational transformation thing. Can you guys, mention, I guess what characteristics does every agency strategy need to have in common, and why? And I think I'll start with you, Josh, and then we'll switch back over to Kirk.
Yeah, so I think for me, digital transformation, it's always about the data. The key is to start managing your agency's data as a strategic asset. So, first you need strategic data acquisition. You need to recognize what data is valuable to your business, and you need to prioritize getting it. And once you have that data, then you need to use it fully. So you need to make it discoverable to your workforce, and you need to provide straightforward access. That comes into the data fabric that I hope, Kirk can get a little more deeper into. And then you need an agency-wide storage strategy. And then after you've done all that, you need to protect the data. So you absolutely, from the outset, need to invest in enterprise-level security solutions.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for setting me up. Yeah, thanks for setting me up there, Josh. Yeah. So, the U.S. government started its transformation nearly a decade ago, actually back in May of 2012, with a new digital government strategy, right? And that strategy built on several initiatives developed in 2 executive orders. The first one focuses on streamlining service delivery, improving customer service, and delivering efficient services. The second one was around accountable government and data protection, and its goal was really to reduce or eliminate redundant programs, right? And so both of those executive orders came together, and the strategy shifted focus from programs of record that created these silos of capability to the beginning of a services or a service delivery mentality in the government, right? And so over time, we've seen these services now integrate across agencies and even become composable to some degree. Now, some of the components of that digital strategy it involves open data, and that direction was further promoted through the Open Data Policy Memorandum. And that memorandum defines several goals to increase mission support, safeguard personal information, and improve public access to valuable government information, right? And so this focus on data also caused an organizational shift, and we witnessed the rise of the CIOs in the U.S. government, one through this open data policy, and secondly through the cloud first initiatives that were set forth by the government CIO at the time. And now more recently, we've seen the addition of chief data officers, and we find that both of these activities have the effect of aligning the agency's organizational priorities to IT now. And so the new CIOs and CDOs also have a secondary role in budgeting, and so now they have the ability to direct or manage investments in the agencies to achieve their transformational goals. And so the 2 characteristics that I see are, number one, the agencies must rely on their IT to enhance and automate the mission, or more directly remove the human interaction moving forward, giving way to AI services and capabilities. And then the second is that they can maintain a data-centric approach to mission or operational goals, which eventually leads to digital transformation.
Sure, and that completely makes sense. And I just want to reiterate one thing, on top of this is that, in many of these organizational transformation, digital transformation ideas, it's not just the tools here, but it's the culture and understanding, leadership make strategic bets where improvements can be met, leveraging people to understand, because in many cases, they're the ones that deal with data on a day-to-day basis and may see things that leadership may not. So creating a strategy together as a team and then finding the tools that meet those needs, throughout the journey. And I think a big part of that is how AI can help there. And I think that'll bring us into kind of the some of the meat of the discussion here in terms of artificial intelligence obviously has very wide-ranging applications. How can this disruptive test be applied into the digital transformation journey of agencies? Josh, how about you start? I mean, your role as chief of analytics branch at AFTAC. I'm curious where you see this change going.
Yeah, so at the outset, I think you're initially going to look at how your digital transformation feeds into your AI. What type of digital transformation, what type of digital assets do you need to be able to get AI into the building? But I like this question because it kind of flips it around and says, well, how can we apply AI to digital transformation? And so at AFTAC, we've actually seen 2 instances that really brought this to our attention. The first thing we saw was that AI can completely transform the way you maintain and sustain your digital assets. I think that kind of plays into what Kirk was talking about earlier with the compressor company that was able to use that tool to go from selling compressed air to selling services. And I think, especially at AFTAC, we've got this enormous global sensor network with off-grid remote networked equipment distributed across every continent. And so we, for a long time, used SNMP to provide alerts and maintenance for whenever there was latency increases or SNR degradation or voltage drops, and it was all based on static thresholds. And those really offered pretty poor sensitivity and specificity. But recently, we've had some great success using AI to characterize those issues. And we're currently in the process of using AI and ML to move from a preventative to a predictive maintenance strategy. The second use case we've seen for applying AI to digital transformation is actually with human-machine teaming, particularly in terms of rapid big data exploration. I think this problem probably speaks to a lot of our audience because with the ubiquity of these always-on sensors, it's really easy for an agency to end up with a vast amount of unlabeled time series data. And human-machine teaming can really address this issue. In particular, some of my research is focused on sort of bimodal representation views for this data, where you can transform it into a Euclidean space that the machine can do a good job of clustering with, and then transform it into sort of a sampled time series space where an expert can look at it and then rapidly assess, sort, and label. So those are, I think, two kind of powerful ways that you could use AI to sort of spur on your digital transformation.
Wow, very insightful there, Josh. So I'll take a swing at it as well. So, I discussed the transition from programs of record to services. And so I believe the next transition is going to be, AI-based services, and it kind of forms the next logical step. So as an example, I think we could look at, video surveillance as an activity that's already in high use in the capital area and then across government locations nationwide. And, it's well known that the majority of that footage isn't processed. In many cases, it's not stored properly either. And so, a perfect use case for AI involves, processing building or perimeter video surveillance. And, typically today, those video streams go to a GSOC or a guard station, and then it's used to inform protective services, and then likely archived on a digital video recorder or sent to the cloud, right? And so an AI, protective service could be built where it would enable real-time event-driven support for threat detection and then automated dispatch to the first responders. And so you'll see, a shortened time from event to response. These events can then also be combined to create a situational awareness versus at a single location, because in almost all cases there's overlapping surveillance or they're within close proximity of each other. And so now you can start to create situational awareness. And then that system can go even deeper by integrating into visitor logs, right? And even used for employee safety via facial recognition, and then potentially record keeping for contract support. And so, I think the U.S. government will continue to see, AI technologies advance, and, they'll have to change policy around requirement satisfaction, some contracting roles, and how they apply this. Go back to our original, set of questions, right? COVID forced the situation to the forefront. And I think while it's incredibly unfortunate that it takes a pandemic, it likely has changed the government in immeasurable ways. And so now that we've been disrupted by the pandemic, I think we're forced to move quickly, and I think we can adopt new technologies like AI, and these digital services are one that's a direct result of that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think, COVID. There's been some discussions, with around COVID and sort of, the idea of obviously there's a ton of data being collected, whether we talk about, you, Josh, at AFTAC, or all the information collected by the CDC for COVID, or in other cases, around the SEC, they've been using AI for a couple of years now with their Artemis program to monitor insider trading. The data's been collected. Now, we've started to, over the last years, and really getting to the point where I think we have the power to leverage all that information, where in the past maybe weren't quite there. At this point in the panel discussion, I know there's a few questions out there too that I'll try to bring in, and either within the panel or at the end. But we'd love to hear from what the audience thinks. We've got a poll question that will appear on your screen momentarily, asking what are the biggest concerns that you face in adopting artificial intelligence to your digital strategy. Take a moment to answer that question, and we'll see the results. And I'll continue on with the panel as you guys are answering that, and then we'll come back and discuss that a little bit as well. To what degree of training and reskilling is needed in order to effectively apply AI in an agency transformation? What kind of jobs do you know, if any, are altered or displaced? I think there's a couple of things there. I think Josh, you also even mentioned a couple minutes ago about the human-machine teaming, which is another thing that we'll get to, I think, in the next question as well. But you know, from a reskilling or training, I mean, obviously, in reading your bio, I've seen, you know, the DoD Smart Scholarship for Service Retention Program. Can you talk a little bit about that for folks? Because I'm sure there are folks that would be interested in hearing about it. Or do you know of any other programs there are in terms of training or reskilling?
Yeah. So I've been really fortunate, really blessed to have good leadership that was able to support me through that. I think there's, you know, a huge need to take advantage of this technology, especially for government agencies, so that we don't get left behind. And, you know, I think there's really two types of talent and training that's needed for effective AI transformation. And at the first thing you need to do is you absolutely need to put these AI tools into the hands of your scientists, your researchers, your engineers, and that's really the easy part. The second thing you've got to do is you almost, especially in a government agency, you almost have to have some real AI expertise in your program management. I'll talk about the first kind of training first. You know, getting the tools into the hands of researchers is so accessible right now with all the free deep learning frameworks like TensorFlow and PyTorch, the massively open online courseware that's also freely available, and then all sorts of, you know, COTS equipment, hardware, GPU workstations, and servers. You can get spun up. You can take a motivated research team and have them, you know, developing state-of-the-art ML models within a month with very little capital investment. But the problem is there's a big gap between dev and ops, and especially, you know, for government agencies, bridging that gap often is going to involve a third party or a contractor, and that's where you really need AI expertise in agency to effectively manage those projects. Now, I'm not saying that you absolutely need a PhD in machine learning, but you need someone with real world expertise who knows the nuances of how these AI models fail, how to properly evaluate them, and most importantly, how to properly write the requirements to ensure that the models are appropriately evaluated under contract.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and you know, obviously, you know, you mentioned as well, you know, some of the many things out there. You know, I know, you know, personally from going to things like, you know, supercomputing or NVIDIA's GTC conference and dealing with the Deep Learning Institute, and they have online courses, instructor-led courses, university-level courses as well. Kirk, do you see anything to add from the NetApp perspective?
I do. You know, so I think what Josh described is kind of the state of the industry today. I would argue that, you know, a business or an individual that wants to use AI technology shouldn't require a PhD or have, you know, the skills of an analyst or a data analyst or scientist of any form. And, you know, the software should improve over time, where it can start to leverage the underpinnings of AI technology natively, right? And so as part of an integrated project that we have called ONTAP AI, which is basically a partnership between ourselves and NVIDIA to deliver, you know, turnkey hardware, we also have turnkey software that runs atop that has been tailored for specific workloads, right? And so we have software partners like H2O AI that works with scientific data, and think of it as an automated machine learning system where you just point it at this pool of data and goes and figures out the salient points and interesting points of the scientific data that you present to it. There's Allegro AI that does you know, video processing, you know, does feature detection and feature extraction and then feature detection. And we have Parabricks that does you know processes genomic data for us on top of those stacks. And then we have Converge IO that helps you build you know, sort of data models that can be presented to any of those open source models like TensorFlow that Josh had mentioned. So, you know, I think in time, you know, hopefully we'll have less reliance on those skilled scientists in order to take advantage of these technologies. And in fact, I see an even further advancement even around programming, right? I've seen some studies that by 2025 that, you know, majority of the software programs that need to be written can be developed by AI bots that actually go off and do that work for you automatically. And then you have to go through and do a bit of peer review, integration testing, and then do a CD from your AI engine. So, you know, I think the world is just getting started with these technologies.
Yeah, if I could say something to that, I think really it depends on the application space. And a lot of the techniques that you're talking about, when you're talking about dealing with video or imaging, where you've got decades of research that's been baked into those architectures that people are using, then you're right. It's really easy to use pure data science on top of two things, on top of data, massive amounts of data that's got all of the human expertise embedded in it, and then architectures that have decades of hard research from domain experts in video processing baked into those architectures. So really, it's interesting because I think AI, there's a sense in which it's a black box, and, you don't need domain expertise to use it. And that's true as long as you understand that it actually takes more domain expertise in the background in terms of all the different, research that's gone into the architectures and all the different human analysts that have touched that data.
Yeah, I agree. Yep, for sure.
For sure. I think that kind of throws us back a little bit. I want to make sure that we're kind of keeping on track and getting through as much as we can here. But the top result from which I think might be interesting. The top result from the last poll was that there are the top result in terms of what was the biggest concern was that difficulties in identifying the appropriate business use cases was the number one concern when folks are trying to deal with adopting AI into digital strategy. And there's even a question in here that discusses. Let me just bring it back up. That many companies, trying to change from a normal infrastructure considerations. Their HR groups, their business development, their IT groups have all had a certain mindset and have gone about life in one way. But right now they may lack the professionals in order to host that kind of infrastructure that would transform the company into a data science company, into an AI company. And I think some of these bits I think are important in terms of addressing that phase. You guys agree with that? Kirk, you can go first on that one.
Yeah, I think I do. I think when you pull back though, if you look at I kind of flip the way I view these initiatives. I think people tick off something that's relatively small and well constrained to apply AI to. And in many cases, I think you can do that with traditional data analytics models or statistical models. And I think you pull back and have a grander vision, right? Think of AI as a grand challenge, and what if I could transform my business by doing X with AI? I think you'll find a whole suite of projects or use cases where you can apply AI to start down that digital transformation, right? So you have to disrupt yourself in order to be comfortable, or to be uncomfortable, I guess, right?
Sure. Josh, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I don't know that those two things are mutually exclusive. And I think, like the real transformational characteristic of modern AI is that you can replace the pipeline, right? You can replace your whole process. You can do end-to-end processing. Start with the raw data and come out with your processed output. And, the pie in the sky dream is to just be able to take, an AI system and solve that process end-to-end. And, I think you can definitely get there. And one of the ways, if you look at, for instance, Google, when they were implementing AI, it didn't start with search, which is their big money maker. It started with speech over on the side, something that wasn't like a huge part of their business. And they tackled that one small piece to get some momentum. And, if you, at AppTac, we've basically found that starting with one of those incremental pieces of improvement is valuable because you've already got the pipeline in place. So you don't have to build up the infrastructure to serve the data to the model. You can just replace this little piece. And the beauty of that is that once you've replaced that piece, the whole output of the process is better. The data is better. And then now that you've got better data, you can train a bigger model. And that's what they call the virtuous cycle of AI. As you continue to get better data, you can build better models and then get better data. And so I think those two things aren't mutually exclusive. It's not bad to start small.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. You know, we can show it how things like that have worked in a couple of different areas. You know, even within, you know, not within AFTAC but within the Air Force, and looking at, you know, refueling and how they implemented DevOps in their processes and making things happen that way. I want to kind of jump to the next poll quickly while we're kind of going through this, and we can keep talking a little bit more about that. And following up is, you know, what percentage of your current operations do you think are being supplemented or fully run by AI tools? Now, take a moment to answer, and we'll continue discussing, and I'll come back to that answer in a couple of minutes. So, you know, I guess, you know, from both perspectives, you know, I'll start with you, Josh. Here is like, you know, what kind of tasks do you see that are automated? You know, what kind of tasks benefit most from a human slash machine team? And then I guess we'll kind of merge a little bit of the two questions that we have here together and say, you know, how do you then evaluate? You know, how do you find that small process? You know, what's the best way to find that small process to create the best AI implementations? You know, can you think of good candidates? I mean, you already mentioned some, but I just want to kind of go on there. And are there ways to do that reverse and say, okay, hey, let me use machine learning, let me use this deep learning framework, and then say, you know, retrain that framework to find something else that we feel like, you know, could be used in this situation. You know, so Josh, how about you go first on this one, and Kirk, you can follow up afterwards, and we'll talk about it a little bit more while we're waiting for the poll to kind of go through.
Yeah, thanks. That's a lot. So I'll start with your first question. What tasks should be automated and what tasks would benefit from a human-machine team? And I think that it's not so much that a specific task should be automated or you know, analyzed. I think that it's really a progression. So at AFTAC, we've been introducing machines and automation into our digital processing pipelines for decades. And so we've really come to see this as a progression with human-machine teaming at the outset and automation at the end game. So once you've successfully performed a task repeatedly ad nauseum until the problem's well understood, well characterized, once you've amassed a large corpus of well-constrained data with high-quality labels, then you're ready to automate. I think your question is kind of like, well, how do you get there? So in the past, you could afford to spend, and we did, everyone did, years doing it manually. But today, in the age of big data, that's often not an option. You might have a data set that's so big that a human couldn't sort through it in a lifetime, but at the same time, the data is completely unlabeled, so there's no way to train a computer. And that combination of big, unlabeled data sets is probably the quintessential use case for human-machine teaming.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'll certainly toss it over to you, Kirk, in a second, but what I wanted to say is that, quickly, is that in our poll, you know, the majority of the number one answer was 0 to 10% are actually utilizing AI, you know, and then followed up by 10 to 20 and 30 to 40. So we're not talking about a lot of folks using this right now, and maybe we should be. And I think that's important to kind of note that the folks on the call are already seeing that it's not being used to the advantage that it could be. So,
yeah, I think. No, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Josh. Go ahead, finish.
I was just going to say, I wouldn't be afraid to start small, to get your feet wet and get in the game, get some experience, get some wins, and get some momentum going for your AI program in your organization.
Kirk, what are you seeing, since you've got a pretty wide range on there?
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll go back to a commercial app, because this was kind of the Big Bang approach. And so,
sure.
You know, we are engaged with a customer to do laser materials manufacturing process automation. Big mouthful there. But the concept was that there is significant information and data in the acoustic signatures being created by the process, and that we wanted to analyze that data for prediction of weld quality, degree of weld penetration, and defects. And we started off with a traditional acoustic signal analysis, looking at frequency bands and you know, trying to do the traditional you know, digital signal processing approach. And then fundamentally we weren't very successful, and so we said, well, let's try one of these AI solutions. And the concept was, well, let's push that data through, train some models, and then see what kind of inferencing we can get in real time or at least near real time. And back to the we thought we'd still use we had identified some frequency bands where we thought the information was present, that really kind of gave us the indicators, and we trained our models, got terrible results. And then one of the engineers on the project says, hey, these things are supposed to figure it out. Let's see what it does by itself. Let's just feed all the data into it, right? And so we just literally pumped the entire acoustic spectrum into these AI models, and then trained it, and instantly we started seeing classification percentages in the high 90% as to whether it was good or bad. And then we augmented the system with plate-borne analysis as well. And when we combined all that information and just gave it raw to these AI models, we started seeing incredible results. And so I maybe I misspoke in the thing, but we sort of self-constrained our analysis by saying, hey, these are the areas, these are the frequency bands where we think the information lies. And frankly, we couldn't see it, we couldn't predict it, but somehow the AI systems were able to glean that information, and the program became a huge success for us.
Sure. That's great. I think as we're going through this, and I don't want to be conscious of folks' times, I'm gonna merge a couple of questions a little bit because I think they relate, and kind of going to skip one that's coming, and I'm going to pull it in later around the strategic side. But what I want to get at is and I think this might answer a couple of different questions within the attendee questions is, and I'm going to start with you again, Josh, right here in terms of we're talking about different processes and different tasks, maybe not as much tasks, but different things that are going on. What I think is important right here is, how do you get those data sets, whether they're, in some cases they may be ones that you own, but there may be some other ones as well. How do you get the data sets needed to start this machine learning and training? And then how do you get those algorithms and platforms then deployed across these different networks in order to make sure you're going? And I understand we can start small with some of these things, and in some cases you may not even need a local machine, because there is the ability to do some of this stuff online in the cloud as well. But when we're talking about this, how do you feel we can get those data sets? How do you feel we can move those algorithms and platforms into our agencies?
Yeah, so there's an enormous amount of data in the cloud. It's incredible. It's a great time to be a data scientist. And as a researcher, when I was in school, you're almost always in academia. You're going to go out and get the data externally, either from some online repository or from direct inquiry to some organization or agency. But I think, and just to steer the conversation toward our audience, agencies that are looking to get in the game, I think when you're an agency and you're looking to operationalize AI, you almost always need to start by generating and collecting that data internally. And I'm talking about even if you don't have it right now. And that answer might be disappointing to some people, and I think Kirk probably has some system that can give it to you for free. But the problem is, if you don't have that process up front, when you try and implement AI, you're not only going to be having to build the model and train the model, you're going to have to build the whole software stack around it to get to feed the data in. And so if you start with, an expert system, maybe one you already have, and you've got this process where you've got small pieces that are done by different types of machine learning algorithms, then you can use that virtuous cycle of AI, and you can go from, first of all, can a person do it? Then that's the individual contributor. Then delegation, can you formalize that process and get multiple people to do it? Digitization, can you automate the mundane parts of the process, build your software stack? Big data and analytics, can you measure and achieve your data-driven success? And then finally you get to machine learning, where you're automating the feedback loop, and then you outpace the human scale. In my experience, I haven't seen it come easy. It takes a huge amount of upfront framework. And so I think there's value in that framework. So to go out and, take your existing processes, get your data, and use your internal expertise to start piecing together that puzzle. And then eventually you'll get to the point. I mean, once you got that first 10%, the next 20% is going to come easier.
Makes a lot of sense. Kirk, what are you seeing there?
Yeah, completely agree with Josh on that one. in several engagements that I've been directly involved in almost all cases, we either found out that we didn't have enough data, we didn't have robust enough data for creating training sets, or we didn't have accurate data, right? And so this data curation is probably the biggest problem or biggest challenge. Sometimes you can self-constrain yourself or not realize it or recognize it. And so while I work for a data company, it may sound like I'm trying to create a problem when one doesn't exist. The reality is that I think almost all these AI projects, their success hinges on having good data and enough data. And I'll put that in air quotes. And, I think the curation of that is where the data scientists can really come in and help folks. And as Josh said, there are data sets that are out there on the internet that are freely available. And so you can start with those if they're, adjacent in the workload or the domain that you're trying to process in. But the path to success, I think, starts with data.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And actually, there's a question here that I think might be related to this, and we talk about, and there might be and I'm going to ask you, Kirk, to address it first. No, I'm Kirk. You're Kirk. You to address it first, and then maybe Josh can chime in as well, because someone mentioned who's dealing with first responders in an emergency situation. How do you believe that data release could be supported in terms of video and stills in an emergency? Could AI be able to scrub data so that released data is only what's needed for first responders, and then say the crime scene data later could be secured? It's probably a very present question right now these days, but I'm curious, do you guys feel in terms of the video analytics side of it, you do think that things could be curated well enough through AI to do that work?
Yeah, so I think you teed me up for that one. I mean, so that's a difficult question. I think in some cases, that the AI can be augmentative, right? And it's an opportunity to retire existing processes and replace it with an automated one. I don't think we've encountered a way where we can predict, where that might work. But in that example, I think a POC is an excellent way to get started, right? Maybe do a POC conducted in parallel with the existing system, so that you can compare the results of the existing process with one that incorporates the new AI. And in almost all cases, those models typically run in two modes, right? You can have them supervised and unsupervised. And so the AI scientists will have the opportunity to discover if a well-trained model meets or exceeds the current baseline, and if a more sophisticated model like an unsupervised deep learning system could be brought in and used in that scenario. So I think the source of that decision once again goes back to the data. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that actually plays really well into Josh's earlier comment about the human machine team, in that if we can get it to a point where this part of it is good, and say, okay, yeah, sure, now we can have somebody to review it. And I think that's that first phase of the supervised learning, and then we get beyond that and then we can start retraining the model to make sure we understand things. Josh, do you have anything to add to that before we kind of switch over to the next question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect use case for that kind of human machine team. You probably can vastly reduce the number of analysts and the amount of time they have to spend. I don't think we're probably at the point right now where you could trust something like that to run completely autonomously, but you could certainly offload a lot of your analyst burden.
Okay, cool. Next one, in terms of, so we'll go through these things, and, obviously, there was a 2019 White House order around and followed up, in February, right before this, a lot of the shutdown stuff, known as the American AI Initiative, in terms of developing a strategic plan for AI. That might be a good place to sort of understand a few things, but where do you feel agencies can start in terms of building that AI strategic plan, in addition to that? Kirk, how about you first?
Well, that initiative, I think, is very aspirational, and there's a big difference between the aspirational goals and where many agencies are today in order to be able to start and complete one of those projects. I think a good first step is start to play with those open resources, all the open source software that's out there. Certainly look to the cloud. It's a quick way to spin up some capability to demonstrate those proof of concepts. But then I think that the sort of the step between understanding the state of the possible and then moving to production. That's where that interim step comes in, where you have to think really big and have large data sets and train with massive amounts of information. And I think that's where a lot of these projects get hung up, because the cost of doing that in the cloud can be quite expensive, even if it's just from the hosting or storing all the data sets required. And so I don't know how we bridge that gap. Maybe it's an on-premise solution, maybe it's a cloud one. There's some interesting capabilities there, because then you get to the point where you're now looking at palming for dollars, and do you have sufficient resources to kind of bridge that initial incubator project into a full-blown production system.
Sure, and I guess to follow up on that with you, Josh, in terms of, even though you're the chief of that group, and that you're starting that group around the analytics, and that buy-in from leadership is key. How do you suggest having the conversation in order to build a strategic plan to implement AI? I mean, obviously, ASTAC has been at the forefront in some cases in terms of trying to make sure that you understand all of that sensor information. But I guess as this group develops within there, how do you have those conversations? How do you build a strategic plan towards AI, a ubiquitous AI solution within, or a platform within your organization?
Yeah. So quite frankly, I think in the current climate, buy-in is not always the problem. I mean, we've got a lot of people attending this. A lot of people are interested right now. I think there's a lot of leaders that already have their finger on the AI button. They're ready to press. So I think, when you're developing a strategic plan like this, it's really important to present a plan that's both manageable and realistic. So you need to do your homework, and you need to do as much as you can with what you've got. And that's an incredible lot right now. The tools in terms of hardware and software and training are so accessible that I think there's really no reason why you can't get started. And there's actually Andrew Ning from Stanford. He's actually the head of Google Brain that started AI at Google. He put out a pamphlet through his company, Landing AI. It's called the AI Transformation Playbook. It's 5 pages long, and it's a really beautiful document. I think it's a great place to start. And basically what he suggests is that you start off, if you're serious, you stand up an in-house AI team with some existing people. You give them some resources and some time, 3 or 4 months to explore, get their feet wet with the data, and then select a lower risk pilot project. And that's important. You don't want to pick your biggest rock. You want to pick something that you're pretty sure you can succeed with, maybe a small piece that's you're already using, maybe some logistic regression or some lower level ML tool, and you get your feet wet and try and get some momentum. Try and get it operationalized by the end of the year. Demonstrate some success with AI in the office. And then once you've got that momentum and that homegrown expertise, then you can start to develop a thoughtful AI strategy. Then you can start to answer those, critical big picture questions like, what's our strategic data acquisition plan? What data is valuable for us and what's not? What different AI assets can we align into a coherent competitive advantage? The problem is, if you try to answer those questions up front without the perspective of experience, you're very likely to waste a lot of time and money.
Sure. No, that makes sense. I'm going to throw out our last poll question while we try to, wrap a few things up. And, it's a simple but important one. Is how do you, the attendees, see artificial intelligence? Do you see artificial intelligence as posing a security threat to operations or not? I guess. So we're trying to wrap these things up and go through things. I guess as we end, for these larger scale projects, I think one of the things that was out there already is like, how do you feel? They may not have all the resources necessary to achieve goals. How do you feel partnerships can come into play? And what success stories have you seen? Kirk, how about you first?
Oh, I think partnerships are critical in that. So, our approach to the market is, open source software, integration partners with, hardware providers. We certainly engage research organizations, universities, and then there's all the ISV software players that are out there around those workloads or use cases that I described earlier. And so it's a combination of all of them, right? So yeah, collaboration is key.
Okay, Josh, how about you?
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting opportunities. A lot of the government agencies, we've got data. We've been collecting it for years. And meanwhile, but unfortunately, we don't have the AI expertise. But at the same time, you've got all these academic institutions that are just filled with burgeoning young scientists that are itching to get their hands on data. And I think there's a real opportunity to marry those two, even in an unfunded way. So there's an unfunded partnership vehicle called a CRADA, a Cooperative R&D Agreement. And we've been able to implement that at Avtech. And it's really been a boon to both organizations because we get access to a growing community of world-class data scientists working with our data, producing state-of-the-art ML models to our requirements for free. Meanwhile, they get access to this enormous labeled data set and, in some ways a unique competitive advantage for their academic program. So we're still in the early stages of some of those partnerships, but we've already seen tremendous results. And I think that's a really great vehicle right now for agencies that have data but don't have the data science.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah, I think those partnerships are great. I mean, I know we were just actually talking through one, internally, and possibly even leveraging some of the AI and bioinformatics at the University of Michigan, because you can do those partnerships. Then you've got you're educating the next generation of folks who are going to come into your place of business or your agency. And then, but you're also leveraging the information that you can get now, and I think that's great. Interestingly enough, the main answer to the poll was that no, it didn't provide a security threat, and I think part of that is that I think there's a lot of government agencies and organizations at this point using AI for the security aspect of that, and I think that's great. I guess we'll go back here just one last, Kirk, do you have any sort of last parting words before we go?
Oh, no. I mean, well, yeah, I think there's some, I say no and then I change my mind, right? I think there's some unique opportunities as well to advance the science through the use of some of the next generation deployed services, think microservices, and the reason I bring that up is, we describe this as a, sort of a big in data center challenge, or maybe an all-in cloud type of thing. But fundamentally, when we look at the problem, you tend to have these sensors that are out somewhere in theater, connected, through radios or 5G or what have you. And so we see a bigger challenge in order to really take advantage of all the content production that we have to span from edge to core to cloud. And so integrating those three domains, I think, is also an interesting challenge, and one where I think some of these concepts around microservices and deploying these edge and fog computing devices out close to where the information is produced can help reduce the burden of all the data that's being produced at the edge, and bring just the salient data with information content into the data center. So I'll just leave it at that.
Okay, great. How about you, Josh?
Parting comments.
Parting thoughts.
Parting thoughts. Thanks guys for inviting me. This has been really great, a really thought-provoking discussion. And to the audience, I'd just like to encourage people, maybe government executives that are interested in getting their feet wet with this, just give your folks a little bit of time and a little bit of resources, and I think you'll be surprised at what they can do. These tools are available, and there's a huge opportunity for us all with this. So anyway, thanks again.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Josh and Kirk. And with that, we've reached the end of the program. I know there are a lot of questions that were on here that we're going to go back and we'll answer, and we'll send them back out to you since we have your contact information. But the full webcast has been recorded, sent to you by the end of the week. Keep a watch for it in your email and be sure to share the conversation with your colleagues. Thank you again, everybody. Hopefully everybody stays safe and healthy, and hopefully everybody has a great day. And with that, I'll say goodbye. Thank you very much.